Public Works, if everyone could come to order and take your seats. Turn your phones to silent, which I will do myself. Done. Okay. Are there any conflicts of interest that anyone wants to declare at the beginning? Seeing none, there's no presentations or delegations today. However, there are extensive presentations on both the water and wastewater master plan and the transportation master plan. So we'll start out with each with those presentations. And so the first person I'm going to ask to come to the podium is Phil Lambert to provide an introduction.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Today we have with us two individuals from GM Blue Plan, our water wastewater engineering consultants. It's Chris Hamill, the president of GM Blue Plan, and Julian Bell, a partner as well with GM Blue Plan. Before we dive into the presentation, I wanted to just highlight the big picture of how we got to where we are today. So you'll see on your screens there, you have Niagara 2041. We've been working on this now for a few years. It's really about fostering an environment for economic prosperity. And what we have is the growth, so we've been working on that growth. That growth has been divided across 500 traffic zones in the Niagara region. We've been working very collaboratively with all the local municipalities, finding out where that growth makes sense, where it's going to go. And then what we used is that loaded up our models. So the models for how we go, the transportation master plan, as well as the water and wastewater master plan, which then tells us what kind of capital projects we need and feeds into the development charges bylaw. So what we have here is a great example. This is the best scenario for growth in infrastructure I've ever been through. We have the growth tied into the infrastructure and then the actual financing with the development charges. And we've had more consultation in this going out under the umbrella of Niagara 2041, having the growth, the go, and the flow all together. So with that, we'll dive into the presentation, and I'll turn it over to Chris Hamill.
Thank you, Phil. So my name is Chris Hamill with GM Blue Plan, joined here with Julian Bell. Mr. Chair and councillors, I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to present the Master Servicing Plan. I've been lucky enough to do this type of work. I've been doing master plans around the province and across the country for over 20 years. And as Phil was describing, I think this has been a great process. I was part of your 2012 master plan where we went through quite a diligent process to get your water and wastewater capital program together at that time. But I think the approach taken this time around with the involvement with the local municipalities, the level of staff involvement across all departments, I feel like we've done a great job. And I think your staff should be commended on the activity that went into developing this water and wastewater master servicing plan. And I think the result will demonstrate a comprehensive program moving forward to help you guys meet your 2041 needs. I won't spend too much time on the background, but going into every master plan, we do go sit back and say what is going to be driving this servicing strategy. Of course, we have operational needs, we have compliance regulatory needs, and of course, we have growth needs. The unique situation for Niagara region with your regional system and your local systems need to be taken into consideration. And then on the wastewater side with some of your combined systems, management of overflows and flooding and that type of thing was a priority heading into this master plan process. We did spend a lot of time at the beginning looking at what is the foundation of this master plan. From principles to policy and to the problem statement itself. So you can see here that, I thought this really set the stage of heading into the study itself in terms of effective infrastructure program, meeting the servicing needs for your existing users, the regulatory legislative requirements, supporting growth. And we talked a lot about addressing priorities such as climate change, energy management, infrastructure optimization, system security and resiliency, and that really set the foundation of heading into our master plan. So we did build off of the previous master plan done in 2011, 2012. One thing you do need to recall is back then we were going to 2031 growth. So having been part of this integrated process, now we're looking at taking you out to 2041. And we saw a very significant change in the planning foundation going into this master plan than we did in the last. So with those changes, that had a great impact on what we looked for going into. So we need to make sure that we look out to 2041, and we need to ensure that we've got a long-term servicing strategy that's thinking about not just the capital, but the life cycle costs moving forward. So the foundation, as Phil alluded to, was worked through with the integrated municipal comprehensive review process. So the same numbers that you were working through with your planners fed into the master servicing plan will also have fed into the transportation master plan. So you can see our target of basically 610,000 people, 265,000 jobs out in the year 2041. This plan looks at the urban service areas, so the lake-based servicing of all your local municipalities does not include Wade Fleet in this master plan. What you should also be aware, if you're not, is master plans follow the Class EA process. So what that means is we do phases 1 and 2 of the Class EA process, and it goes through all the public consultation and documentation that goes along with a normal Class EA. So we need to look at our background information, we need the context of the servicing, we look at the baseline conditions of your existing system. So what are we starting with in terms of your water and wastewater? Then when we add on the growth, what are the impacts and what are the best strategies to deal with that growth when we layer that on? Ultimately, this master plan documentation gets filed for public review, and I'll review that at the tail end of the presentation. But what you can see here is to get through what's basically been over an 18-month process, the documentation that gets developed through a master plan such as this is significant. So what we've done is we've divided it up into 5 volumes. The volume that was provided to the committee in advance of this was volume 1, the executive summary. That really captures the whole study and gets it there in a nutshell. But you can see what we will have on public review is all 5 of those volumes. So it has the executive summary, the background information in volume 2, all the water analysis in volume 3, all the wastewater analysis in volume 4, and then volume 5 is the full consultation process showing you all the PIC materials, any comments received, and how they were addressed. So when we put those in the locations for review, all 5 of those binders will be sitting there. It's a lot of documentation, and we understand that. But the foundation then is we look at water and wastewater. So what do we need to service when we have that 2041 growth? We did go through a review of how much water typically we use. It's important when I show you there the residential and employment demand. So the 300 liters per capita or 300 liters per employee per day is a good basis for planning purposes. So we have to remember that doesn't necessarily mean that every single homeowner, big, small, every employer, they're not going to use exactly 300. You have some pluses, you have some minuses, but for big picture planning at a master plan level, using 300 for both residential and employment works well. We then look at the max day, peak hour factors in your system. So what's your biggest day look like? What does your biggest hour look like? And then what we've also done is what's called a starting point methodology, where we don't just put those design criteria on the population or employment. We look at where your systems are operating today, and we project our growth and we project our flows from that starting point. That gives us the best estimate of the flows you'll need in 2041. So you can see for each system, the amount of growth that you're seeing in each system. So, for example, in the Grimsby water treatment plant system today, you're looking at about 14 megaliters per day on average on a day. A max day you could see as high as 25.9, but out in 2041, those numbers are then 26 and 45. So you can see the order of magnitude of additional water that will be needed in each of these systems on a go-forward basis. Similarly for wastewater, we have 275 as our base criteria. You have a peaking factor, which is the Harmon formula that, we see those instantaneous peaks when everyone uses their toilets or facilities around the same hour. And then here's a big important level of service determination that we did under this master plan through this series is the extraneous flow rate of 0.286 liters per hectare per second. So what that means is, as you can appreciate, when we get these heavy rains, and it feels like it hasn't stopped raining for about a year, but when that happens, the land area, that water can work its way into your sewer system. So no matter how tight you think they are, you can get some cracks in the pipes, whether they go through the manhole lid. So when it rains, you're going to see some extraneous flows. What we've determined is that for sizing your regional infrastructure, we will assume that 0.286 liters per hectare is what we will plan for getting into your system. That doesn't mean that's all that gets in. So at times at heavy rains, you will see more water get in there, but we're not going to build indefinitely big pipes to service the highest rainstorm. So our level of service that we determined under this master plan is the 0.286. For those that have been around a few years, you may recall this 2 times peak dry weather flow level of service that we had previously. We worked with that, we reviewed that, but we felt this was a better way moving forward for the master plan. So that was an important level of service determination. And then similarly for each of your wastewater treatment plants, you can see the level of growth on an average day going from 20 to 32, say at Baker Road, or 34 to 45 in Port Dalhousie and so on. So that's an order of magnitude of the additional flows that we're seeing from growth. As I mentioned, from a key servicing policy, we wanted to make sure that we had good guidelines on how we make our decisions at a master plan level. So reserve capacity in the system. You can't use your pipes or your facilities right to the last drop before you expand them, because you could have emergency conditions, you could have operational needs. So we looked at ensuring we had reserve capacity in our system. We looked at resiliency, reliability, and risk management in some critical areas. The impact of climate change, so that wet weather condition that we were describing, we were very aware of. Other things such as energy use. So we had a great exercise, particularly on your water system, on how we're pumping the water. How much is it costing us to pump that water, and can we figure out a better strategy to manage some of those costs? I&I reduction as it relates to climate change was a big piece as well, and that's greatly influenced the program that got developed. And ultimately, we still need to be cognizant of F55 and F51. So as you know, when we're planning particularly our wastewater systems, we're looking at new growth as not having a negative impact on the level of service that we're currently providing. So what has that resulted? That's resulted in the capital program that you see on the maps here. And that was presented in the Volume 1 Executive Summary. So I was going to briefly go over each map just so you have an idea of what the servicing strategy looks like. Not sure if this is, no, I don't think it is a laser. So you can see that because of the growth, the Grimsby Water Treatment Plant will need to be expanded in the future. Those yellow lines then are helping us move the water from the treatment plant out through the system and ultimately push the water up the escarpment to the Smithville area. So Smithville had, oh, appreciate it. Thank you. I'm not sure how well, oh, it does show up well. So thank you. So again, expanding the treatment plant, pushing our water through the system to help pump it out through the other areas. Ultimately, we're moving our water up the escarpment into Smithville. And with the amount of growth that we're seeing in the Smithville system, we needed to strengthen the water main network in that area. So ultimately, this is the trunk infrastructure and upgrades needed to deal with the growth and the existing level of service in the Grimsby and greater areas. As we work our way over to the DeQ, Niagara Falls, Niagara on the Lake system, so again, this is one of your more integrated systems. So with your treatment plants, you can see there is a much larger interconnected network that works its way through the system. It's well positioned from a capacity standpoint to deal with growth out to 2041, so we don't have any treatment plant upgrades. But we do have some facilities at the plant, so there's been a project with respect to its inlet channel here. You can see that with some of the growth in parts of the area in Niagara on the Lake, we are looking to strengthen the distribution in that area. And with the growth down in these parts, you can see that we have some additional trunk water main optimization around connecting the system to keep the water quality and flows moving, and as well as storage in the area. So again, these systems were well positioned to support growth out to 2041. As we work our way down into Fort Erie, one of the bigger changes is with respect to storage. So we are proposing a new elevated tank in the area, which would also provide some connection back into the system. With storage in this location, we're looking at strengthening the distribution system. But this is one of those examples where right now, by putting in this new facility, we're able to decommission some of your existing facilities and now reduce energy costs, because in the old system, you had to pump, put the water into a reservoir, pump it back out, but now with an elevated tank, we can do that much more effectively. So not only does this strategy help with growth, help with locating some of your facilities, particularly in this case, close to your employment areas, future employment areas, but now also improve your energy use through the system. As we move along here, same idea down in this system and in the Welland area, we can see that we have interconnectivity across the river canal, and we have some decommissioning of old facilities and providing new storage in the system here. So the water strategies are relatively straightforward, particularly as we get through the other systems. With the amount of growth, we weren't seeing a lot of treatment upgrades, but we are seeing some distribution upgrades. In this particular case here, with the amount of growth in the sort of the northeast, we needed to extend the feeder main into that area. And then as we work our area into the Fonthill and Fenwick, we are optimizing the pumping. So we are increasing our pumping capacity in this case, and we're all going to replace that elevated tank with a new higher elevated tank, which will support feeding ourselves down into the Fenwick area. So that is the water system strategy in summary, and obviously with questions, be happy to go back through that in greater detail. The program itself, I always have to step back to read these tables myself. So again, you can see that the total capital program is $306 million related to all that infrastructure that I highlighted there. The new treatment plant, the additional feeder mains, the storage facilities, and any decommissioning with respect to optimizing the systems. So this capital program itself was the same capital program that was an input to your DC process that I know Council has worked through in the recent months. So working with the DC team, we did take our $306 million and review the benefit to existing. Was there any post-period oversizing? And then in the case of the inlet channel, we do have some grants and contributions there. So you can see of that 306, we had a net 207 million DC recoverable. So this is the order of magnitude of what it takes across all your systems at a regional level to deal with existing issues, to optimize your systems, to provide the appropriate level of reliability, resiliency, and to meet growth out to 2041. So moving towards the wastewater servicing strategy, this is where you start to see some of that climate change and discussion we had around I&I removal. So what you'll see on these maps here is you'll see, several of these symbols, these water drops that we have throughout many of the systems. What we did actively with staff and with local municipalities that look at ways, what is the most cost-effective way to not only deal with servicing our growth, but also trying to manage our wet weather conditions. So in many cases, while you'll still see some capital upgrades through the system, by having a targeted I&I removal in certain areas of your system, we're able to actually either defer or completely eliminate building bigger pipes to deal, if you will, the rainwater. So what we're trying to do is find an effective way to manage the water getting into our system so that we don't have to upsize our pipes just to get it down and treat basically rainwater. So what you'll see is on the wastewater side, we have an effective combination of new infrastructure as well as a targeted wet weather program. And that targeted wet weather program is something that's was well received with the local municipalities. We'll still build off of that CSO program that you're used to, but it is now going to take a proactive means to go out into specific areas. So now you have a master plan that has identified where and how much water we need to get out of each of these pockets. And that's something then that the region and local municipalities will work together to help mitigate that wet weather situation. And if you recall, these projects were also included in the DC program and are cost shared in a way that supports growth as well as level of service. So you can see for the Baker Road system, we do have some wet weather programs throughout. We have some sewage pumping station upgrades to help convey the flows to the treatment plant. We do have a Baker Road wastewater treatment plant expansion We've captured a lot of the growth in some of these areas. So you'll see, like, you know, if you take the Prudhome's area, for example, you are going to have pumping station upgrades, but they do have a cascading effect. So a lot of things that we need to be conscious of on wastewater is how does it cascade to the infrastructure downstream. Another similar case was the amount of growth that we were seeing in Smithville, the pumping station upgrade with force main and sewer upgrade all the way down to the plant gets triggered because of the amount of growth there. Moving through to the Port Dalhousie system, what you'll see here is significant amount of those blue drops. So again, what we need to do is we need to work together with a wet weather program to get that wet weather out of the system. By doing so, it does not trigger any major pipe upgrades down through St. Catharines. So we believe that's the most effective way to deal with the growth from a wastewater perspective. We do have some isolated pumping station expansions there. Similarly, on the Port Weller system, you can see that we're not proposing big trunks all the way down to the plant. It's a function of managing the wet weather programs through those existing systems. But I am going to talk a little further detail. What you'll do see here in the South Thorold area is ultimately we are recommending that we pump the Peel Street now south to the east down to the South Niagara Falls system. By taking this service area off, it actually alleviates some of the pressure on the downstream works through the St. Catharines area. I'll elaborate that in a moment. Looking at Niagara on the Lake area, we have some isolated pumping station upgrades, but nothing overly significant. And again, the work you just did at the treatment plant at that location serves you well out to 2041. Working our way down, you can see now in the Niagara Falls system, and I'll expand on it a little bit better, but we are committing to the strategy with the new South Niagara Falls treatment plant. By proposing this plant in the south location, you're essentially creating a south and north system in Niagara Falls. So everything north of Lundy's Lane will work its way to your existing treatment plant. That ensures that we have sufficient capacity at the treatment plant to support that. It will also allow us to continue to bring flows south to that plant, so it brings the opportunity to decommission the Queenston wastewater treatment plant, so you are dropping off one of your major facilities. But by introducing this new plant in this location, it now greatly supports where your growth area is in the south, and now starts to bring in some of your related systems over. So this has a great benefit to not just Niagara Falls, but to St. Catharines, to Niagara on the Lake, and it really positions you well for not just your 2041 growth, but growth beyond that. So this was a significant strategy, and that's why we did come to the committee earlier to describe it in greater detail to ensure this wasn't the first time you were seeing this level of infrastructure upgrade. Again, your Stevensville, Douglastown lagoons will remain in service under this strategy. So there is a bit of growth in this system, but would trigger some pumping station upgrades. But again, we'll work within the lagoon capacity. Working our way down through Fort Erie. Again, it's mostly pumping station upgrades. I forgot to highlight through all of these recommendations, you still have wet weather programs in almost all of your systems to help manage the flows. Working our way down here, this is Crystal Beach. Again, some isolated pumping station upgrades to deal with the growth on the outskirts, as well as some concentrated wet weather program in the core. Working our way through Welland again, with the amount of pumping stations through this system, there are a number of upgrades, but we are looking at targeting through some of your existing areas that wet weather reduction. And then working our way back up through this area, you can see again, wet weather reduction. And then because of the growth and level of service that we need to provide out, we do have a new Foss Road pumping station upgrade and force main to bring its flows back into the system. But again, from a treatment plant perspective, all your plants are in good shape, but we do need to upgrade Baker Road over in Grimsby, and then with the new South Niagara Falls treatment plant, that'll really set you up for 2041 and beyond. So just to reiterate the strategy in Niagara Falls, again, this isn't just about Niagara Falls and South Niagara Falls. It has a significant impact for St. Catharines benefit, it has Thorold benefit, Niagara Lake benefit. So as I was describing, you'll see now where these areas were all these areas were pumping north up through St. Catharines. We will now focus those flows back into the South Niagara Falls system where there is enough capacity to bring it back down to this location. These areas will then feed to the South Niagara Falls treatment plant. That frees up capacity to allow growth to continue to your existing facility, and then we bring these Niagara on the Lake areas to the existing plant. For those that were part of those meetings, I mean, the benefit is significant. Yes, there are large capital costs associated with it, and there are ongoing life cycle costs, but it does better set you up for more effective costs for post-2041. It really does manage the risk associated of stranding capacity. So you'll be able to put that facility in, build enough to meet with your first step, and then if you're seeing growth continue, you can add on in a modular fashion to the capacity of that new plant. So really that's giving you the greatest flexibility for existing servicing and future servicing for not just Niagara Falls, but the other surrounding systems. And I think it probably mitigates capacity risk, capital investment risk, et cetera. But let's not forget, through all of these upgrades, there is still a large recognition that your existing sustainability upgrades, so state of good repair of your existing infrastructure is still critical. So one thing I do need to remind you is the capital costs that I'm showing you here for the master plan is a growth-driven program. You're still going to continue to invest to ensure that your existing pipes, your existing pumps and facilities can continue to provide the level of service they need. So even under this new South Niagara Falls plant, you'll still need to invest in the existing Niagara Falls plant, but to a lesser degree. So the capital, again, associated with the wastewater program, just over $500 million for all of those projects. So it's not just capital, and that includes the major capital for the Niagara Falls plant, but it also includes, I think it's almost $150 million associated with that wet weather program. So all those blue dots that we showed across those maps over the next 15 to 20 years is going to add up to about $150 million of investment, but the deferral and the elimination of infrastructure beyond that is even greater. So again, that did get fed into the DC program. So you can see of that $500 million, there's about $200 million associated with benefit to existing. So if we're enhancing the level of service to those existing areas, particularly with wet weather, then there is a benefit to your existing service areas. There is some oversizing, and you're about 283 in net DC recoverable. The other thing I would like to really emphasize as well for committee is our capital costs. So what we do in a master plan exercise is the $500 million for wastewater, the $306 for water, those are in today's dollars. Those are in 2017 dollars. So what you do need to remember is that gets budgeted and that gets fed into the DC program, but the DC does the indexing or the inflation within its calculation. So a project that I might show today at $1 million, if it gets built out in 2025, it's going to cost more than $1 million. So I think it's one thing to really remember that some people go back to these documents and they say, well, that came in over budget. That's not necessarily the case. We're telling you what it costs in today's dollars. There's a recognition that it's going to get inflated or indexed over time. So I always like to reiterate to remind people that this is in today's dollars. When it also gets implemented over the next 20 plus years, those costs will reflect current conditions. So the final update schedule then is we had a great exercise through the winter of 2017 and in the spring to get the DC program fed into that process. We just met with the local municipalities, so we had all local municipalities in a workshop on May 17. We had good feedback and consensus with the program that's in here. We're here today at Public Works Committee on the 30th. So the important timeline is we're looking at a notice of a completion that could be ready this week. We do want this adopted through council on June 8th because we're looking for a filing period of June 15 to July 31. So on June 15, those 5 volumes that I was describing are going to be sitting there on the shelves for the public to review. That's normally a 30-day review period because of the size of the documentation and the fact that we're into the summer, we extended it to 45 days. So that's important for yourselves and your constituents that this document's available for review, not just on the website, but hard copies available as well from June 15 to July 31. And that's the summary, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. Committee, Phil, Chris, Commissioner Tripp, and Julian Bell
That's correct.
will answer the questions as we go through. I have a list starting, but if Councillors Kazan and Gale don't mind, I'd like to start with Councillor Burrows because I know he's got to go quickly. So I'm going to allow Councillor Burrows to go first, if that's okay. You're bumped. Councillor Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll remember that. Thank you for your presentation. It was great. But just using the closure of the Queenston sewage treatment plant as an example, doesn't that involve then force mains?
Yes.
I don't know whether you go to St. David's and up or you go straight up to get to the Stanley. The capital costs, you've done all that, and I'm only using that as one example that I know well. So it's better to close it than bring more sewage in to be treated.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. In this case, we felt that that was an optimization of infrastructure. You're absolutely right that the plant just doesn't disappear. We do need to pump the wastewater back into the system. But we felt it made more sense to have a pumping station instead of a treatment plant at that particular location and optimize all treatment at the Niagara Falls area.
So would it go up
It
through
goes,
Parks Commission or would it go to St. David's?
It'll work its way through St. David's
Okay.
and south to Niagara Falls.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Burrows. Councillor Caslin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just looking at the list on slide 28, I know it's small to see, but if I've got the paper in front of me, there's a number of projects that are year-in service 2017. I have to assume all those projects are either completed or are underway through you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, if I may, Mr. Chair. When identifying the timelines, we were working as well with the DC program that was looking for a short, medium, and long-term block of areas. So what was identified was a 17 to 22 timeline. And you're absolutely right that to have something is either in the works for it to be in 17, but more than likely you'll see a lot of those projects either starting in 18, 19, and would be completed within the first 5 years of the program.
Thank you. The other key year, as you alluded to, you've got it in blocks, but is 2022. And I see an enormous amount of work that's scheduled to take place in 2022. And given the scope of some of these projects, I would assume that some of them are already in the engineering stage. And is that correct?
Thank you, Chair. I'll let Mr. Hamill start. Just it has to do with the span or the range of years.
Yeah, so what we've done is similarly, we have a 22 to 31 block. So it's the same concept. What we have identified and working with an implementation binder for staff is we are showing the components and, if you will, not so much the cash flow, but the timeline scheduling of how a project needs to be complete. You can appreciate for a major project such as the new treatment plant, you're still going to have an EA component, a design component, and a construction component. So we've been able to provide the information through to staff so they can schedule and budget each of those steps for ultimate implementation. So your in-service date, in some cases, may not be exactly 2022. It may be somewhere within that period. We have identified each step and when it needs to get started to be able to meet those timelines.
I just want to highlight the amount of work and expense and resources that are going to be required for that period of time. Although it's still a ways off in the distance, it looks like a significant portion of the capital program is going to take place during that period.
If I may add to it as well, Mr. Chair, the other thing that we are doing that was part of our terms of reference in working with Phil is we're also providing a development monitoring tool. So the reason we're doing that is we want to make sure that the projects are getting scheduled and being built when they need to get built. So for example, you'll be able to track within each of the catchment areas or each of the service areas, and if growth is lagging behind what we thought it was going to do in, say, the growth plan that was provided to us, it'll give you the flexibility to push some of these projects out a year or two or whatever it needs. Conversely, if we're seeing aggressive submissions being put forward and we think it's going to happen, it's going to give your team the ability to schedule and bring things forward. So we've done our best estimate based on the growth plan in front of us. However, you will have flexibility to shift projects to ensure they get built when they need to get built.
Excellent, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Gale.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, thank you for this. You touched on it at the end of your presentation there about the existing piping and the infrastructure. So my question is, and maybe wasn't in your scope, are our plans for the future for upgrading our pipes and sewers and that sufficient to keep up with our new plants and that? Did you touch on this with your scope?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So you're correct. What I call a state of good repair program wasn't specifically in our scope. However, we work with staff to understand you do have an existing program. My experience in most municipalities, I think there's always, if we could do more and accelerate some of that rehabilitation of existing infrastructure, it'd be nice to have. But we're aware that at least you do have an existing program. It's funded through your rate-based funding mechanisms, and it's at least moving forward to help support that. There's probably always opportunities to optimize that, but at the same time, you have something positive moving forward that will support the master plan. And I don't know if staff needs to elaborate on that at all, Mr. Tripp.
Commissioner, can elaborate on that.
Thank you, Chair. So the question speaks to our asset management plan work. So yes, we do have infrastructure renewal program. Council recently saw the presentation of the asset management plan, another initiative, which was connected but outside of the scope of this work. It has identified that there are some funding challenges in water and wastewater in terms of sustaining our current infrastructure. This is a clear indication of what's necessary for growth, but the foundational and maintaining good state of repair is also critical to that.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is, and to show you my lack of knowledge as compared to Councillor Burrows who just left, but gravitation as opposed to pumping. I look at St. David's coming up to Niagara Falls up the hill. Is that a concern? The cost of pumping, I would think, would be phenomenal in some of these places. Do you consider high to low rather than pumping, or is that not a concern?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's absolutely a priority on the wastewater system. We look at maximizing our gravity system as much as possible. In some cases, though, you just don't have the ability. You're always going to have some topography that you need to overcome. In other cases, when you're already dealing with a mature existing system with facilities located in certain places, so if a treatment plant is there, we don't want to necessarily keep introducing a number of smaller treatment plants just to simply avoid pumping. So in many cases, pumping is an effective way to concentrate your costs, but it does come with life cycle energy costs. So we did look at that as much as possible. Sometimes the lay of the land is really what dictates what you need to do.
Thank you.
Councillor Gale. Councillor Rigby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question, and I don't intend to try and create a political issue for Councillor Jeffs, but I do want to know, was there any consideration, because 2044, 45 isn't all that far away, and sometimes conditions change. Was there any consideration of the potential of having to implement wastewater systems or water systems in that township? In the town of Wainfleet or towards it?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So at this time, no, that was not taken into consideration.
Okay. Is it something that we should keep mindful of if citizens in that area have a different attitude towards that system?
I believe that with the way we've set up our program and understanding the triggers to new infrastructure or capacity, I think it's something that could be factored in the future, but we haven't necessarily allowed for connections at this time in the program.
That's fine. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Rigby. Councillor Grenier.
There you go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions. The slide on page 7. There we go. The 2.86 liters per hectare per second is a general average across all the surface area of Niagara. And I'm going to make sure I understand this correctly. But there are areas that have a much more acute flow, and then the capital costs of mitigating that are reflective in the plan. Is that what I?
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
So 286 is the level that we are going to plan for. So there are existing systems that some, if they're newly built and built well, you'll see that flows are at 0.286 or even lower.
Yeah.
But there are definitely many systems across Niagara that are far greater than 0.286, particularly when you get into a combined system such as St. Catharines. So in the areas where we believe that your existing system cannot meet 286, that's where you saw a lot of that wet weather program. We're trying to get the systems tighter to get down as close as possible to those areas. But I think what you'll find is what we're willing to do is size our pipes to that level of service. And I think that is a industry approach. It's a typical best practice that's done in many other municipalities as well. Because otherwise, if you were to pick a 0.4 or 0.6, and we actually did through the master plan look at the sensitivity of trying to increase that level of service, what you'll find is that most of your regional infrastructure would have to be twinned. So there's a appropriate level of service, then there's basically working together with your local systems to try to prevent the water from exceeding that level of service.
Okay, thank you for that. And that's what I thought. It's a baseline factor and how we would start, and then the sort of solution to this is these wet weather mitigation. I'm trying to go through the roster of projects on page 28 and try to figure out which one of those would be identified as these wet weather things, or is there something else that is going to be done for that? Because I saw the one line item, and I chaired 4 budget cycles in Welland, and I understand the challenges of dealing with the inflows in that community. But I see $30 million there, but there's no specificity of what that might look like.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, it's absolutely been an important topic of the implementation of these master plan recommendations. What are the next steps? So you're right. First step was to identify so what staff have in our master plan document is our targeted amount of I&I removal. So all your WWII projects 1 through 15 are our targeted locations. The next step will be region and local municipalities will work together to determine each of those areas are going to have their own unique solutions. So what that capital is intended to do is start investigations. So you're going to have some modeling analysis. You could have flow monitoring. You're going to help better define the problem itself. Through investigations, you're going to determine what are the range of solutions for us to make that reduction of 30 liters per second. Then that's intended to support the design, then ultimately the construction of whatever the specific recovery mechanism will be. So at a master plan level, we've looked at a range of solutions, and as a firm, we're familiar with what the range of solutions are. Each area is going to go into its own level of analysis to determine what is the best value in that particular catchment. So there is a number of next steps related to that $1 value.
Councillor, Commissioner Tripp would like to add to that. If you
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I guess a simple answer to the question is it's an extension of the program we currently have, the CSO program, but it needs to be further refined, further expanded, certainly in magnitude. I reference a couple of examples, the work we've done in Fort Erie and Crescent Park, the recent work we've done in Thorold South, specific to, as Mr. Hamill has mentioned, both those areas. In fact, a reference work in Welland as well, working directly with Mr. Nickel. Unique solutions that cater to the area, whether it's private side elimination, whether it's straight on sewer separation. There's a number of approaches and strategies, and we need to work through that with all of the local jurisdictions. So that work is yet to come, and we'll be coming back to this committee. But it starts with the analysis and the modeling, similar to what we recently did in Thorold South.
And wait, can I extrapolate this, that a quantifying of the problem too would be part of this as well, to measure exactly
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, we've already done a level of quantification of what we believe the problem and target should be. That'll be further refined in these steps, yes.
And it's, just make sure that, because my next question will be built on this, that everything from lot level mitigation to CSO and joint of, like, similar to the Oxford Atlas Wellington project in Welland, that the separating sewers would all be part of that, just for example, that $30 million spend in Welland.
Yes, you would look at a full range of solutions.
Could I ask for something as we move forward on this? Councillor Gale touched on this, but is there some kind of pathway to talk about funding and where the next steps would be? Because we'll prove this on the 8th, but can we talk about this, particularly with the arithmetic side and the how we would get there somehow? Because it is the tabular thing really is not all that clear, and I think that might help us move forward on that to
Commissioner?
more of a timeline.
Through you, Chair. So the short answer is yes, and it'll be an extension of this work. Like this is really foundational in terms of change in direction in terms of our philosophy, our policy on how we support the local jurisdictions and the elimination of infiltration. It certainly establishes a new budget envelope to support those initiatives, but the steps and the how are going to be the next steps that'll be coming back to Public Works Committee through a refinement of our CSO policies. It may ultimately have a different name to it as we go forward, but that needs, in my opinion, respectfully to the committee, needs to be done in consultation with all of the local jurisdictions, so they are solutions, because point of fact, based on my experience, that they need to be driven and championed at the local level in order to be successful, and I think you would agree with that, Councillor. So we need to do that work, and it will be coming back to this committee as an extension of this foundation.
Thank you. I welcome my opportunity to get back on the soapbox about stormwater and help move the yardsticks. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Volpatti.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'm sorry, is it Julian?
I'm Chris, and
Chris.
this is
Oh,
Julian.
sorry, Chris
That's
and
okay.
Julian. Thank you again for a really good presentation. And I want to echo your comments and the statements of Mr. Lambert about how important it is that we're dealing with a unified approach to go, grow, and flow, that we will have a really integrated vision for growth as a result of this, and I think it's remarkable that we come to this finally. I have a couple of questions, and going on with the separated wastewater systems throughout the region, is there a great difference in each municipality as to how much they have combined sewers and how much they've been able to do with separated sewers?
Yes, Mr. Chair, every system is unique, so there are many other outside systems that are more separated, and it's primarily you'll see through the St. Catharines and some other areas that are more combined.
That are more combined.
They are different, yes.
So in this process that we've been discussing with this report, these municipalities will be encouraged to continue to separate their systems. Is that the approach that we're using through you, Chair?
Mr. Chair, so not necessarily. So there are many systems, not just in Ontario, but across the country and across the world, that can still be effective in having a combined system, and you can be managed well. So a lot of times the cost to go to a full separated system can sometimes be unsurmountable. So in many cases, it's a function of managing and can we be effective with the system as it sits in still managing our wet weather issues.
Right.
Sewer separation is always an alternative that will always be put to the table, but you can appreciate that separation of one pipe, you need the separation of things leading up to it, you might need the separation of things leading down to it, otherwise it still gets integrated into combined. So it's a broader issue than just simply saying let's separate the pipes. Okay.
So we'll work with what we have to accomplish the best that we can do, I guess, with what we have and with the monies available to do it.
That's correct.
In each municipality. Thank you for that. I think you mentioned something about growth in the future employment area between Niagara Falls and Fort Erie. which is a really critical area. It's a free trade zone, one of the only ones in Ontario. It is the only one in Ontario, only one of two in Canada. So it's a really important area for us. So you've contemplated lots of growth in your report for this area, I would imagine.
If I may go back to the map, I guess the one area that I was referring to, I passed it. There. It was easier to see on the water one. So you're right, we do have the area here that has been flagged as the employment area. So what we are working with is the growth numbers as provided through the municipal comprehensive review. So the master plan itself is working within that context that was agreed to. So we're not making any independent decisions of massive amounts of growth. However, when we do look at how we've set our systems up for even growth potentially beyond 2041, we are keeping in the back of our minds. So while we haven't oversized anything, we are thinking about, well, if those free trade zones, as you referred to, those other employment districts that could be expanded, say along the QEW corridor, that was part of the visioning when we thought of the South Niagara Falls treatment plant as an example. However, everything that you see in this document is focused on the planning numbers as provided to us.
Okay, so that's what you've used, and I imagine they would contemplate growth there, I would think. Okay. It's hard to tell from this map, and you don't have to provide that now, but I would like to see, if I can, a map that shows exactly the boundaries of this employment area, of this gateway zone.
Okay. Phil, I think we would have that. I guess, Mr. Chair, maybe through staff, I think that could be easily provided.
Yeah, I would appreciate that, and thank you very much again.
Councillor Augustine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks very much for the presentation. Just to build on some of the questions that Councillor Grenier was asking, I'll start with that first. The 2.86 liters per hectare per second. What's our current level now?
As I mentioned, Mr. Chair, there are existing systems that far exceed that today. There's many that are within that range, typically the newer built areas, but there's a wide range. We've seen, Julian, I think numbers are 0.6 and even higher in many other areas. When you get into a combined system, then it's significantly higher than that.
Okay, but you're saying the new builds are that are separated or in that, and that's the industry standard?
Yeah, you would want to see new construction of separated systems to be within that standard, yes.
Okay, that's perfect, thank you. I notice in the strategy, the goals, the strategy for wastewater, it talks about wet weather management, not removal. Can we just hear, is that true?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So you're right. I think wet weather management could be dealt with in different ways. So management could be that perhaps you can't get it out of the system, but you can store it so that it's coming into your system through off-peak. So I think the reason we've chosen that language is it's not necessarily always not getting into the system, but managed in a way that your existing capacities can deal with it. So when I talk about the range of solutions, you're going to have some where you might have a downspout disconnection, so at least now we don't have that water getting where it shouldn't be getting.
Surging in. And,
however, if an area is already disconnected, yet we're seeing high flows getting into certain pipes, it might be better to provide some storage or inline storage or what have you. So you haven't actually removed the wet weather, but you've managed it in a way that your downstream capacity can accept it. So we didn't want to presuppose what the solutions would be in each of the areas.
Councillor, the Commissioner would like to add to that too.
Thank you.
Through you, Chair, and just an extension of what was said. I mean, the ultimate goal is elimination, but having dealt with this for most of my career, there's going to be jurisdictions or circumstances where it's really not either economically practical or physically practical given the conditions, whether they be groundwater or the nature of the system. Philosophically, the goal is elimination, but practically speaking, it's characterized as management because they're, and whether it's sequential or not, in the case, again, reference to Thorold South, stifling development until elimination is not a viable solution. We want to manage the situation so that we can allow development to occur as well in an informed and risk-adverse way. So at the end of the day, it ultimately is a management portfolio or philosophy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I guess I would tend to agree with the commissioner if the goal is managing this so that there are no more dumps of sewage or diluted sewage into rivers and streams. So does this plan stop that?
This plan, I think, puts together the most comprehensive attempt at doing that. I can't promise stopping it only because when we get rainstorms of the 100-year, your regional storms, there are things that sometimes are out of our control. And so for me to categorically be to say that you'll never have another bypass, I unfortunately can't say that. However, what I can say is that this master plan has been much more proactive in targeting areas that contributed that to minimize a risk around that occurring as much as possible.
So what are we, I guess the question is, what are we doing to, I can understand that. Now we're seeing 5-year storms or 10-year storms every couple of months, right? But is it a goal? Are we trying to stop these, they call them bypasses, but essentially it's diluted sewage being dumped. Is that one of the goals that we're trying to do? And we might miss the mark slightly, we might get it wrong. Isn't this our opportunity, Mr. Chair, to do that? To say, okay, 25 years from now, we can do that, we can achieve that.
Commissioner.
Through you, Chair, and I guess it'd be helpful just to set the expectation. 25 years from now, I suggest to you is not at all likely. Yes, it is ultimately the goal. I'll reference the two oldest systems, Niagara Falls and St. Catharines. You're managing a system that was developed a century ago. They are a combined system, as was said. By nature or virtue of the design of the system itself, elimination within 25 years is not realistic. And it certainly places a huge obligation on the local jurisdiction for absolute separation. What I think I can look to Mr. Hamill to speak to is this goes well beyond what our legislative obligation is, which is F55 and F51, and he can speak to that. Based on his work in other jurisdictions, and I think specifically of Halton, who had very significant issues that they're trying to address right now, I think he could provide a bit of a context in terms of how far we're pushing the bar, the bar beyond our peers.
Yes, Mr. Tripp, happy to do so. So there's no question that if I look at the evolution of master plans, and particularly in light of climate change, even our 2012, we had an infrastructure-focused strategy that was dealing with this is what we expect getting into our regional system, and there was an expectation on local municipality participation. However, your procedures that were in place, while helpful, weren't necessarily going to tackle the problem. So by looking at level of service and looking at enhancing the amount of flow we can take through our systems, and then now introducing this $150 million plus investment into the systems themselves to get the water out, it is a much more significant, that's probably one of the highest wet weather programs that I've been through, as Mr. Tripp was alluding to in Halton. That's more than the region of Peel. We are now getting ourselves looking to enhance the level of service to protect ourselves environmentally. So this master plan has taken a step beyond status quo and just accepting the rain it's going to get in there. We've made every effort, and it's been a much more integrated fashion with both regional and local to be able to deal with this issue. So
thank you.
I think if I could reiterate, our goal is to be environmentally conscious. Our goal is to try to eliminate these things, and this is a strong step in getting you there.
Thank you. Those other systems are newer systems, so maybe that's why they don't need the investment that's required. I'd be interested in knowing, Mr. Chair, so we said what the goal is. It's sort of to eliminate it. Does it get us to 75%? Does it get us to 80%? I'd like to know what that is. In terms of the water side, I'm going to get a little parochial here, Mr. Chair, and I look back at the stage 3 or the PIC 3, where it talks about, this is the Fenwick water, it talks about here additional conveyance, and the idea in the PIC, which was just a few months ago, transmission water main from the pumping station in Fawn Hill to Fenwick to improve existing operations. I understand that's changed now, and that was news to me, and I'm sure it'll be news to council, local council. Can we just hear about why that's changed? There's a, in essence, you'll see there's a single supply to the Fenwick area coming from Fawn Hill. Town council's been on record as wanting a second connection, both for circulation of the water, but also security, more importantly, security of the supply. And they were talked about a elevated tank, perhaps, to mitigate that, or another line. So can we just hear what changed, and can I get additional sort of background information?
Sure, Mr. Chair. So the way that our water works, it gets ourselves out to that area, is from the source, it is pumped up, and then it works its way down through a series of PRVs to the service area. So you're correct that there is a single feed that works down into that area. There was contemplation of bringing another pipe across to have a second feed into the area. What really changed was some of the level of discussions, particularly on the operational side. So the one thing that we have to balance in determining a preferred strategy is not just growth and capacity, but we need to think about operational issues and water quality. So the one thing that was raised is the source of this water, and the fact that you don't have a very large demand at the end of this one pipe can present some water quality issues. So it's difficult for us to maintain high water quality. The introduction of another pipe actually exacerbates that issue. So that was one of the overriding factors. What we have done, though, is by having the pumping station upgrades and providing additional storage, we've now enhanced the security of the water, if you will, supply that can get to that area. However, it is still maintained through the single pipe. However, the capacity that is recommended for the system is sufficient to deal with the growth to 2041, but manages our concerns around water quality.
I see. I'd still be interested in seeing the background documents. I understand that there are folks in that area that are concerned about the security of water. If that line ruptures, what happens? They don't have water for, thousands of people. So, and this just compounds that. So just looking for those background documents that can be sent around. I can't find them on the website, Mr. Chair. So if that can be forwarded, I'd like to review them. I think those are all my questions at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Redekop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation. Just a couple of questions with respect to conservation. And in terms of the water capacity that's anticipated in the future, taken into account conservation methods or efforts?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So at this time, we need to protect against positive impacts of water conservation and the reality of implementation and what we actually see. So one thing we need to balance in a master plan is ensuring we don't undersize our infrastructure that's going to be there a long time, but ensure that we're not at the same time oversizing it if we're going to be using less water in the future. So one of the mechanisms we do to truth test that water conservation is that starting point methodology that I was describing. So what we do is we track the water use in the system and we project our growth from that point. So for example, if the system is using this much water today or 5 years ago, but we see that it's dropped over the last 5 years, we will now project from that lower line. So that is gaining ourselves capacity every time we review our systems. So that's really the primary area that we take water conservation into effect. We do look at the sensitivity of the 300 liters per capita per day, and that's something that gets reviewed on every master plan update. So if we see that water conservation is taking effect and that your systems are responding and we're seeing that per capita drop, each iteration of these master plans will review that criteria, and then the tools that staff have now are easily inputted to determine if that changes the sizing or the timing of infrastructure. So what I see most times in dealing with water conservation is, let's make sure we're not planning for too much capacity, but at the same time, monitor it over time. And if we're not seeing the water being used, you can defer out this capital program by a year or 2 or 3 or whatever the impact may be.
Thank you. And do conservation efforts vary from municipality to municipality?
They do, but I don't want to speak for the region, but I believe you have still a proactive water conservation mindset, and I think that continues on in all municipalities. And I guess it's a function of the uptake or the culture of a given municipality to see how low they want to go. I think I've seen a range for certain municipalities putting a very aggressive target of a liter per capita, but that runs the risk of not having the infrastructure in time if they don't achieve it. But I think I've seen positive outcomes across all municipalities, and what we're seeing is liters per capita slowly dropping.
So, Mr. Chair, since all the taxpayers of Niagara are going to be paying for this, I would think that we would want to encourage maximum water conservation throughout the region, because that will save all taxpayers money over the long term. So on the flip side of that, when you're doing your calculations with respect to wastewater infrastructure that's necessary, do you also factor in the impacts that may be realized from the reduction of what you call wet weather flows?
Yes, so through you, Mr. Chair, that level of service that we identified at the 0.286 is assuming that those other areas with those blue drops of water are going to get themselves down to that number. So that is part of the calculation of the capacity that we need. And even the base flows attributed to the homeowners or the users factor in our criteria itself as well. And Mr. Chair, if I can make one clarification, I think when we talk about water conservation, there's no question that it's the water rate. So the users on a day-to-day basis, conservation is going to help their water rate. What we're talking about here is the water being used by the growth, right? So everything we've talked about today is essentially DC driven to a certain extent. And if those future water users continue to use less water, then the new growth and the new infrastructure build could be deferred.
And Mr. Chair, if I might, can I safely assume that every municipality has a water metering program?
I would say most, yes, absolutely.
So I would think that that would also be something that we should be encouraging all municipalities, because that's a definite water conservation mechanism.
Oh, sorry, you're referring to the regional municipalities? Or you're talking about
the local municipalities?
Local municipalities. I think the answer is yes, but I would have to defer to staff to what level of proactive response or that metering program itself.
Okay, that's fine. So in terms of the wet weather flows, if I might, Councillor Augustine raised some of the issues that I have. I don't think we can ever get to zero. I think we understand that. But as an example, in the town of Fort Erie, about a third of what we pay for in terms of treated wastewater is actually stormwater by our calculations. And it would seem to me that if we could even half that, we've increased the capacity of our water treatment facilities by 16%, 16.5%. So how seriously should we be approaching this, and how seriously does this plan address that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think we've taken that very seriously, and I think, like I said, this is a plan that now targets that approach. So while you've had a successful project over the years, there's still been an expectation that the local municipalities would bring certain projects forward, the region would participate, and it was an encouraged program, where now we're trying to shift it to a integrated regional and local municipality targeted program. And I think by now being a targeted program, it's demonstrating that this is an essential part of achieving our capacity needs and ensuring that we're not treating water that doesn't need to be treated.
Right, and it also results in the bypasses that occur, and with the current trend that we're in with a lot of wet weather incidents, we're seeing that happen, I think, more than we would like. The town of Fort Erie has had some very good work with, in conjunction with the region with respect to this particular issue. So I'm encouraged by your answers. If I could focus on a couple of things relative to Fort Erie. One had to do with the Stevensville Lagoon. And the lagoon itself is going to be a long-term impediment to growth, both residential and industrial. And I'm surprised that there isn't some thought about consolidating the wastewater needs there with either Anger Avenue or the Crystal Beach plant. Crystal Beach plant would be directly south, although the lines may provide for a different grade right now. I would have thought that that would have been something that was essential, particularly since it's in that gateway area.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it was considered, and at this time we felt that the capital costs associated with the new infrastructure to connect it to one of those systems, and we did even look at going north to the South Niagara Falls system as well. But that it's a distance issue, and the reality of the available capacity there can support the growth that was flagged. So we felt at this time it merited leaving.
So if I might, Mr. Chair, how frequently is this plan going to be reviewed? Every 5 years?
So through you, Mr. Chair, the intent is for an every 5-year update.
Right, okay, that's fine. And then finally, I wonder if you could go to map 22, which was the subject of some questions by Councillor Volpatti. And I can't actually read all of that stuff, even on my own iPad, but it looks like the brownish area going east-west is Gilmore Road. And I'm guessing that it goes to Pettit Road, north of the Queen Elizabeth Highway. The CMS lands would be further northwest, and the marina on the parkway would be even further north, almost straight north. I don't see anything that would address either of those projects, both of which have been identified as supported projects by the region.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the areas that were flagged within the municipal comprehensive review, so the flows associated with those identified growth areas are considered in this. So because we have a regional master servicing plan, a lot of the local pipes that you might see within those blocks of land aren't shown on our maps, but they are considered, and we have through our implementation map showing where we expect them to connect to and how they're going to work their way to the treatment plant, up here. So I take your point well, Councillor. I guess you're right, it's not crystal clear, but I can assure you that any growth area that was flagged through the MS or the Municipal Comprehensive Review is connected to our regional system.
Right, and I suppose, Mr. Chair, to some extent, these are projects that haven't yet been identified, but the marina has an RFP that closes in June, so that there should be some movement on that. I did have some dialogue with my Director of Infrastructure Services, and he indicates that the regional directors, the municipal directors throughout the region support this plan. He tells me that the lines that might service CMS or the marina would be local lines, which I find hard to understand, since they would be transmitting large flows of wastewater to wastewater plants. I would have thought that they'd be more typically a regional trunk main. Any comment on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the local service policy is generally around 170 liters per second. So if the block of land, while may seem significant, if it's not creating flows greater than 170 liters per second, that is local servicing and the pipes are connected. So once it hits that threshold, then you're starting to introduce new trunk regional infrastructure. But you're right, in any large block of land, you might still have smaller pipes that connect to a bigger pipe, but even that bigger pipe isn't going to cross the threshold, in this case, of being called a regional trunk.
Thank you very much.
Councillor, Commissioner would like to add to that, if you know.
Thank you, Chair. Just for further clarity, the two specific examples, which I would characterize as sort of a unique status, CMS as well as the marina, they were actually subject to a very comprehensive review led by the town, but cooperatively with the region as well. Mr. Lambert was a part of that. So although they're not explicitly called out in this work allows for the conclusions of that work.
Right. Thank you very much. This is very enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Luciani.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just like to get a copy of the slide deck sent to my office, if I can.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just for myself, if I could ask a couple of questions. In this process, I know a lot of people have been said a lot of positive things about the process you went through for this. Were you able to achieve municipal staff unanimity for the plan?
Mr. Chair. We've had great support through our local municipal workshops, and as you saw just recently in May 17, the intent of that last workshop was to ensure that they understood the strategy, they understood what it was going to take to implement both from their perspective as well as regionally, and that we had some consensus that this was the best path moving forward, and that was the feedback from our workshop on the 17th.
Okay, excellent. The other part is it's an integrated system that you've got here where everything kind of depends on the other. So really the plan is not to be looked at as a buffet where we can pick and choose things that we want to do. Is that safe to say?
Mr. Chair, I think that is safe to say. Many of these pieces are linked to each other, particularly on the wastewater side. You can't do an upgrade at this end if it's going to send the flows here and you don't do the upgrade further down. And absolutely the wet weather management that's been a hot topic in today's conversation, if we're not achieving and we're not implementing that piece of the puzzle, then that is going to continue to strain the infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. Okay, seeing no further questions, I'd like to thank you for the excellent work and presentation and job during the Q&A. And I'm going to look for Councillor to move PW 22-2017. Moved by Councillor Rigby, seconded by Councillor Luciani. Any additional questions or comments to PW 22-2017? Councillor Caslin.
Mr. Chair, I'm wondering if you want to associate the consent item with that as well.
Wrong one?
Oh, sorry. No, it's transportation plan. My apologies.
No. No, we'll get to that.
Clever.
Okay, so any further comments or questions to PW 22-2017? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, another presentation now for the Transportation Master Plan, and it's going to be led by introduction from Commissioner Tripp, which you can do from here.
Yep. Thank you, Chair. Coming to the podium now is Mr. Bruce Morey from IBI, Jack Thompson, who has been working with us directly at the region, Suzette Chu, also with IBI, and Mr. John McGill with Parsons, supportive of this initiative. I just wanted to step back similar to the way that Mr. Lambert did for the water wastewater. This to be presented to you now, the Transportation Master Plan, it was before Transportation Steering Committee previously, is the culmination of work that's been in earnest for approximately 18 months. It's been a considerable amount of time. I just wanted to highlight that sort of the importance and the significance of this work, but in the perspective of how things have actually changed. Approximately 18 to 24 months ago, when the terms of reference for this work was established, we did not have a go announcement. We were in the infancy stages of the consolidation work with IMT, and we've now actually achieved triple majority of IMT, so things have changed on that front. And there was also a considerable amount of work done on the airport front in terms of a review of the two airport facilities within Niagara and potential for Niagara region's role and jurisdiction in that. So a number of things have changed the landscape in terms of transportation that are certainly spoken to or considered as a part of this work, but I just wanted to qualify that this work wasn't intended to be the panacea, the ultimate solution on all fronts for transportation. It is multimodal, has due consideration for all those different elements, but it does also recommend further work in by the way of goods and movement study and further analysis on many different fronts. So Mr. Morey's going to lead the presentation, the overview. It does highlight significant change in direction in terms of policy and direction for us, although many of the recommendations focus on our road infrastructure. It doesn't, the work itself does introduce a shift in direction in terms of our the region's support of complete streets, a recognition of or understanding that we have to support all users of our road corridors other than just the vehicle, which has historically been the predominant favor. So with that, I'm going to turn to Mr. Morey, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Maury. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for the opportunity to speak today. As mentioned, the Transportation Master Plan is integrated with the Niagara 2041 growth strategy, and the master plan defines the infrastructure improvements, policies, and plans that meets the future region's transportation, existing and future needs over the next 25 years. And the plan recognizes that there's some really dramatic changes on the horizon and that have occurred in the past, and that will fundamentally affect transportation. Those include emerging technologies and advent of autonomous vehicles, structural changes in the economy, major demographic shifts, and a large 36% increase in the population of the region in the next 25 years. So the plan is designed to really position the region to be leaders in transformative change and to leverage the opportunities brought about these changes. So the transportation vision provides a conceptual base for the plan, and it was building from the strategic priorities from Niagara Council. And the vision states that in 2041, Niagara region will be supported by a transportation network that will help establish Niagara as a leader in livable communities, economic development, tourism, sustainable transportation, and the emerging shared economy. The vision is supported by 7 goals, and together these statements recognize the importance of transportation in supporting Niagara's competitiveness and quality of life. The TMP involved extensive consultation and was very successful for a high degree of input, and we particularly heard from all peoples, including significant input from young people and students, and this feedback was very, very important in developing the strategies and directions for the study. There were 4 cross-cutting themes that came across from the input and our technical analysis and needs assessment. And the first theme is that transportation is a catalyst for change. So mobility investments that improve walking, cycling, public transportation can really help bring about that transformative change to the region. It can help attract and maintain a talented workforce, and it can help bring business investment. Connecting the region is the second theme, and there's a need to better link the local communities as the region grows, and also to provide improved connections to the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area and to the United States. The third theme is meeting the needs of residents. So for the young, seniors, and families to thrive, we really need to have more convenient and affordable alternatives to the private automobile. Oops, sorry. The fourth and final theme is taking advantage of new technology. And emerging technologies can really make mobility much more cost-effective, much more convenient, and there's many innovative transportation solutions out there that the region can be very much a leader in. So the TMP focused on 6 action areas to address the region's transportation needs. And the first is complete streets. As you heard, it's a very foundational part of the Transportation Master Plan, and it supports the TMP goals of integrated transportation and land use, sustainable transportation, healthy communities, economically viable communities, all important stuff. And Complete Streets recognizes that streets should be designed for users of all ages and all abilities, and balance the needs of all transportation modes, not just the car. And there's emphasis on walking, cycling, and public transit. And it also incorporates street features and amenities, so it provides a really attractive environment to live and work. So it's recommended that the region plan and design road projects using the Complete Streets approach, designing roads to be universally accessible, safe, and comfortable for all users. Complete Streets policy should be incorporated into the official plan so that Complete Streets are an inherent part of the process and not an afterthought. Active transportation is an action area that promotes healthy communities and also is another increase in transportation choice. And a key goal of the Transportation Master Plan is to make cycling a realistic option. So it's recommended that the region invest in active transportation facilities and supporting infrastructure. Some of the key actions will include implementing the strategic cycling network that builds on the Bikeways Master Plan that exists, but it fills in some gaps, serves some underserved areas. So over the next 10 years would provide a complete usable grid and a high quality level of service with that. It also involves implementing wayfinding signage to help cyclists navigate the system. It also involves working with the Active Transportation Subcommittee to develop and support cycling education and safety. Public transit is really critical to providing choice, but it's currently not very convenient for the vast majority of trips in the region. And traditional fixed route big bus services typically perform poorly in low density areas, and some 95% of the region, of the urbanized part of the region, may be considered low density. So the strategy for transit is to create a more flexible system, a more flexible model, and still builds and uses the core fixed route system, but supplements it with demand responsive services using technologies to improve efficiency and cost effectiveness. So core services will be strengthened in areas that can support them, and demand responsive services will be used in lower density areas. Intermunicipal transit will be provided to all of Niagara's municipalities, and the region will also work closely with Metrolinx to expand the GO Transit rail services. The region has a well-developed network, but with growth, there's going to be a need to improve accessibility and connectivity, both within the region and to the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, and both working with enhancing movements for private automobiles and commercial vehicles. So for the region, the strategy includes implementing over 65 regional road improvements to address operational and capacity deficiencies, undertaking or completing environmental assessments for Niagara Escarpment Crossing and the South Niagara East-West Arterial Road. And it also involves protecting transportation corridors that will be needed in the future. With the region working with MTO, the strategies include widening the Queen Elizabeth Way, highway interchange improvements, implementing the Niagara GTA East Quarter and extension of Highway 406, building a new Niagara Hamilton trade corridor, and that's intended to offload the Queen Elizabeth Way and also provide an alternative route. And this particular project has been studied extensively for the past 15 years by MTO and has been previously referred to as the Niagara GTA Transportation Corridor. So while planning for this new corridor, a short-term solution to offload QEW is needed, and it's recommended to work with MTO to do a study to look at a solution to provide this alternative route, and it could involve improvements to Region Road 20, Highway 20. Transportation Demand Management, TDM, and Transportation Systems Management, TSM, are strategies that can make better use of the existing transportation network and system. So they're typically low-cost, easily implemented solutions, so something like traffic signal priority, ride-sharing programs, and these type of initiatives typically have high benefits relative to their cost. And it also involves something that's very important, is the region embracing technology and new mobility type services. Efficient goods movement is really critical to the economy, and the Niagara region is situated on a very important but highly congested international trade corridor. So the strategy includes working with provincial and federal governments to advance a Niagara Hamilton trade corridor and Niagara GTA East Quarter to provide kind of an efficient trade route linking Niagara region to the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area and to the United States. With this, we mentioned undertaking a goods movement study to address localized goods movement issues. And it's also important to protect Niagara's region's marine, rail, and air infrastructure to allow for future growth opportunities. The implementation phasing is prioritized into 3 timeframes. In the short term, over the next 5 years, the focus will be more on policy implementation and programs, things that help get this transformative change moving, and implementing some quick wins in development road projects. Over the medium term to 2031, we'll be focusing more on major road projects, freeway connections, completing the strategic cycling network, and expansion of transit with connected intermunicipal services. And over the long term to 2041, that would be focused on the implementation of the Niagara-Hamilton Trade Corridor and completion of major barrier crossings and intermunicipal road and transit projects. The proposed phasing is shown on this map, and the blue represents the short term, green the medium term, and yellow the long term. This table shows the estimated capital cost related to the strategic road capacity investment. So over the period to 2041, the total capital cost for road expansion is estimated to be $494 million, with active transportation and field project estimated at $25.8 million. So taking the previous road expansion costs and adding rehabilitation, some other road-related costs, the total road capital cost to the year 2041 is estimated to be $1.26 billion, of which $462 million is assigned to development charges benefiting new development. And this reflects an average annual expenditure of approximately $50 million, which is lower than the current 2017 roads capital budget of approximately $67 billion. So these cost estimate includes an allowance to construct roads to complete street standards, and the additional cost to do that is roughly in the range of 5 to 15%, depending on the road right away. So based on comments that we hear, we will be finalizing the transportation master plan. It will be presented to council, and then it will be made available for public review for the 45 days. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions starting with Councillor Quirk.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, thank you, Ms. Morris, for the presentation. And of course, we just had the same presentation at Transportation Steering Committee last week. And I wanted to thank staff, yourself and staff, for incorporating some of the comments further on the agenda for receipt as the memo from Jack and the team with respect to some of the changes that came out of the discussion. So the direction was that Regional Council consider airports, off-road trails, rapid bus transit, and light rail transit as part of the Transportation Master Plan. I don't know if you want to just comment on some of the changes or some of the considerations that have been put into it as part of the plan. I do know from the presentation versus what's actually in the master plan, there was a lot more detail in the master plan that was in the presentation. So I don't know if yourself or Jack want to comment on that, just so it's more to the memo aspect of it.
Through the chair, I'd like Jack Thompson to respond.
Thank you. Through the chair, so at the Transportation Steering Committee, we did receive some very good comments, and we tried to explain it at that time, but we followed up with a more detailed memo. So within the actual Transportation Master Plan document, we do discuss airports in more detail than we did in our presentation. And we are aware of the various reports that have gone forward with respect to the Niagara District Airport and Niagara Central Dorothy Regling Airport with respect to their governance and funding. So we know that process is going on, but we've alluded to it in the actual report. With respect to the off-road trails, there was a discussion, why wasn't the Transportation Master Plan addressing that in more detail? We did have a scope of work that focused on the road corridors themselves. Notwithstanding that, when we did the strategic cycling network review, we did look at opportunities where we could connect to the off-road trails. And we have, as part of the complete streets, identified that if we are in a right-of-way, which is not conducive to provide cycling facilities, that we would consider parallel off-road trails. So we have dealt with it, maybe not to the level that was anticipated, but we have tried to deal with it in the Transportation Master Plan. The third element there was with respect to why didn't we be a little bit more creative and look forward to looking at bus rapid transit or light rail transit within the region of Niagara. And as Mr. Morey has indicated, right now the densities in the region of Niagara are not conducive to that type of service. Notwithstanding that, we do believe that we need transit priority measures, and they could take many forms, and one of those forms could be light rail in the long term, it could be bus rapid transit, it could be just signal coordination where the buses have flow-through opportunities. So again, we've taken the point that was raised and we've included a little bit more documentation with that. We also wanted to note that because there's been a change with respect to the representatives with respect to Brock University and Niagara College, that following the Transportation Steering Committee, we did meet with those gentlemen and chatted about what the Transportation Master Plan was about, and their concerns, of course, are related to UPass funding, which is important to them and important to the region as well. And I think the last item, which is not on this particular document, related to the motion to remove Livingston Avenue from the Transportation Master Plan as presented. It was carried by the Transportation Steering Committee. We have left it on, subject to what Public Works Committee would like us to do.
Right. Thank you, Jack. And I know I'll talk to the Livingston extension when we get to the recommendations of the Transportation Steering Committee. I just wanted to highlight that the change that you did contemplate with respect to rapid bus and LRT to the actual master plan and the text there, and I appreciate that. And your comments for the other two issues with airports and off-road, I want to thank you for putting that forward. And when this is received, I would hope I could ask the clerks to circulate this memo from Jack to all the members of the TSC when it is approved. So thank you, and thank you for all the work on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. Councillor Sendzik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think some of the questions have been answered, so I'll just look at it from a higher level in terms of how I interpret the report. So I'll qualify it by saying still new, 2 years into it. So for those who have been around the council table, I think this Transportation Master Plan study started previously in the previous term of council in terms of getting the base for it. What I'll say is as a newish councillor who's quickly losing his shine on being able to say that. This is a challenging document because I don't see it, this is not a very forward-thinking document. And I say that in the utmost respect. But even on the intermunicipal transit, I would expect that regardless of where we are today, you'd be looking towards the future, and that this document would have been firmly in the position of a required intermunicipal transit system of some form over the next 25 years. Rather than what you've done in here is pretty much pointed us to maybe a year out. And if I were to read this document, this should have been much more of a visionary document, not well, you have 9 transit systems, I'm really not going to comment on it, but there's complete lack of direction on that in terms of what I'd be expecting from a member of council to challenge us to think in a different way. I think the absence of LRTs, absence of looking at where the future of travel is going, there's nothing innovative in here. When you look at the automation of cars and the automation of trucks and where we could be in not even 25 years, but 10 years, completely absent in here. Looking at rail, marine, and air and simply saying under an action item to protect it, completely lacking in looking at what actually should we be focused on rather than just protecting. Either give us some concrete concepts that we need to debate rather than just say we need to protect our rail, marine, and air. I have no idea what that means. Connectivity to the different municipalities. We have a transportation master plan being underway. I don't see it referenced in here at all. What kind of connectivity do we need with the local municipalities? It may not be your job as the consultants to do that, but we have 12 municipalities and one upper tier, and we have transportation patterns and grids. I don't see the overlay in here at all in terms of how should we be doing a better job. And the reality is that while I appreciate the work that's gone into it to the chair, there's nothing in here that would create a sense of, one, urgency, and a sense of we've got to challenge ourselves to think in maybe different ways on modes of transportation. And so I don't know how to change that. We're at the final stages of this plan, but I would articulate that this transportation master plan, I would hope that council now, if we take this document, will have discussions amongst ourselves as to what does the future of transportation look like. When you look at a Hamilton, when you look at a Kitchener-Waterloo, when you look at a London, when you look at an Ottawa, you may be not seeing density today, but we're seeing density just in the last year of people moving into Niagara Falls, Niagara-on-the-Lake, Thorold. We know things are changing quicker today than they did 10 years ago. And yet in this document, this is like a 10-year-old document with not a lot of vision in it and foresight as to where we're going. So I don't know, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for getting on a bit of a soapbox there, but if there's an opportunity for us as council in the next couple of months to have a very serious discussion about what transportation in all of its modes looks like in Niagara over the next 25 years, I would be interested in having that discussion.
Turn to Commissioner Tripp.
Through you, Chair, I guess start on a positive. This is a very critical and important foundation for our way forward. We do have to build on it. For clarification, this was initiated and supported in terms of its scope and its way forward by this council, informed also by the local jurisdictions through your transportation folks in terms of defining the scope of work and where the vision was. Respectfully disagree. It is quite a step forward in terms of where we've been in the past, and when we speak to complete streets and how we actually establish the priorities, how we deal with our streets. Yes, it is largely a road focus in terms of its the work, the technical work that has been done. With respect to some of the references, again, with my opening comments, so many things were not established when this work began to inform how we go forward. And we've made incredible progress. Specifically with respect to IMT, at the time, there were a number of unsuccessful opportunities for the region to push forward with intermunicipal transit in a concrete established form, the way to go forward. After this work commenced, there was actually very significant progress, and ultimately with the triple majority establishing the role of regional, Niagara region in intermunicipal transit. This was all recognized partway through the process. There is, I would suggest to the committee, the work that was done by Dylan that quite clearly articulates at least the next steps in terms of how we go forward with intermunicipal transit. It was deliberate in terms of public works intentions not to compete or interfere with that work, which still I suggest would have been presumptuous to dictate where we needed to go. It's being respectful of the work that was being done with the 3 local providers in the region itself. So I mean, that's just one example, and the airports are another where things changed partway through the stream. But this scope of work was established in 18 months ago. It is a very significant, important, and valuable piece of work, but it is a foundation. It sets a stage to where we go forward from here.
If I could just clarify, Mr.
Sure.
Chair, in terms of the relationship between at least the lower tier municipality of St. Catharines and the region, the comment that you made about the connectivity, I would argue it's not there. And so we've been waiting for our transportation master plan from the region. The city has been waiting. The interconnection between the two, while you may publicly state that it's there and we're working together, they're not. And there was significant delays in this. So that needs to be put on public record. And the connectivity between this report and what should be at the transportation level of the lower tiers isn't there. And I would expect that moving forward, there will be much better connectivity between the 2 levels. So that's what I'll be watching from the St. Catharines perspective. But again, I would say that a visionary document shouldn't be a stand today document. It should be looking into the future and challenging us as councils to make sure that we're looking at where the modes of transportation are going. This is this is really a standstill document. It's here's where we are today. It's not about 25 years down the road, and no pun intended on the road.
Okay. Councillor Diodati.
Thank you, Chair. My observation, or maybe something I didn't see in here, and I don't know if it was considered, when I was looking at the east-west corridor and the Hamilton-Niagara trade corridor, I didn't notice a connection or reference to the new hospital that's going to be built. And I think that'll be a major factor when you're going east-west, because it will be servicing a lot of the south of Niagara. So I'm trying to make a constructive criticism that I think it's something that needs to be factored in. It's an announcement that was made just a few weeks ago by the province. It's going to be a major center of excellence for many things. And I think that needs to be factored for especially east-west traffic. QEW does the north-south pretty good. And my other comment or question through you, Chair, is regarding mobility apps. You know, oftentimes we have train breakdowns or ships going through and bridges down. And I'm wondering if there's a simpler way of addressing these types of things rather than our own Niagara app, if we can tap into international apps like Waze or Google Maps, ones that travelers would be using. So you know when there's congestion, accidents, construction, down bridges or stop trains, things that stop the flow of goods and services in the region as well as productivity. So I just throw those two comments to the consultants, Mr. Chair.
Through the chair, first of all, you mentioned the use of apps and other advanced information technology, and that's very much an inherent part of the plan, embracing technologies and using such things to really improve incident management, travel information. There's a number of emerging applications that are making some significant inroads in the last few years, and it's incumbent upon the region to build upon it and be a leader. The region is also undertaking an intelligent transportation system report right now, and it's important to build with those results with the transportation master plan to kind of provide that system efficiency, convenience to the user. With respect to your comment on the east, west, and the hospital, I'd like to defer that to John McGill, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair. We did a lot of consultation with the local municipalities, and we spent a lot of time with the city of Niagara Falls about what their plans are. Some of the railway issues, the Morrison Street crossover, the development out by Chippewa, and where the hospital is located. And we did increase, if you look at one of the maps, I'm not sure how we get to the map. Can you get me to the map? So we looked at some of the, at the strategic level, the corridors that we're talking about really need to be defined. The east-west corridor, the Hamilton-Niagara trade corridor are significant initiatives that need a little bit of more thought process to finalize. But you can see that we increased the amount of regional road infrastructure improvements in that area of Niagara Falls, south of Niagara Falls to the north as well, that might help service some of that area, although, you know, at a highway level, freeway level, we had not incorporated that. But we did spend a lot of time with City of St. Catharines, Grimsby, Niagara Falls, to make sure that we incorporated a lot of their municipal initiatives, especially on the roadside, to try and embrace that. So hopefully that covers off that. We haven't actually specifically talked about the hospital, but we looked at the development at the south end of Niagara Falls and tried to build that into the road infrastructure.
That's good, Chair. I just want to make sure it was addressed because this is going to be significant. It's going to be $1 billion center of excellence and a consolidation of sites. So it's going to be pretty important moving forward. And I just want to make sure it's easily accessible for those that need health care. I think it's important. Thank you.
And just to add to that, if you don't mind to help out a little bit, on page 78 of the report, there's capacity expansion projects, and 5 of the roads are roads leading to and from the hospital. With Shizler, Lions Creek, Stanley, and so on and so forth. So there is some of that mentioned in the report. Councillor Augustine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think, you know, some of the comments that Mayor Sendzik spoke of are similar comments that were at the Transportation Strategy Steering Committee, that this document isn't a forward-thinking document. It's sort of solving the problems and issues that we never got to in the last I don't know how many years. And so that's why the committee, Mr. Chair, called for let's put in this LRT, let's put in bus transit, let's put all those things in and plan for them. Because, Mr. Chair, if you don't plan for it, you don't work the plan. Plan the work and work the plan, and that's the feeling here. We think about, 25 years. Well, 25 years ago, the casino wasn't open yet, right? 25 years ago, Niagara College didn't have a campus where it currently has a campus. And I spoke about this when we looked at this last time and all of these plans coming together. And at that point, we talked about having these reach goals. And I'm upset. That was 8 months ago, and here we are. This is just a status quo, as Councillor Sendzik said so much more eloquently than I'm saying, Mr. Chair. Previous councils talked about nodes and corridors. I don't see any of that in here. Oh yes, it's coming. I don't see that here. The town of Pelham, I'm going to get parochial here, has talked about the idea of linking into transit. If you go to the transit slide, and we've been patted on the head like little Cindy Lou Who, saying, yes, we'll put it in, and it's not here. Linking Fenwick in, and we're just going into one way and not going the other way. And yet there's connections in other areas as well. So, the Transportation Strategy Steering Committee had some pretty strong comments on this. And, this isn't forward thinking enough. As I said, this is sort of solving things that should have been solved years ago and we've been fighting for. It's not innovative. There's no big thinking. So, Mr. Chair, I don't know how to fix that. I mean, we have a report on this agenda to say, yes, we're going to study it and we're going to look at it. The time is now to do those kind of things. If we don't plan it now, it's not going to happen. And it's similar to wastewater. If we don't plan for that, it's not going to happen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner?
Thank you, Chair. I'll start and actually defer to Mr. Mustachi, who can touch on some of the planning perspective.
That's my opinion.
You'd ask a question about why nodes and corridors were included.
Well, okay, thank you.
That's what we were addressing. Commissioner?
Through Mr. Chair, I just want to make the comment that it doesn't preclude any of that, and this is very valuable input and discussion. It is the way forward in terms of that consideration. This has solid recommendations that require funding and need to establish status through a DC background study. But in terms of the question about nodes and corridors and its relationship with the planning work that's being done, perhaps Mr. Mustachi can touch in.
Commissioner Mustachi. Through you, Chair. I think the comments from Councillor Augustine are relevant in terms of not a formal identification of future growth centers and corridors. And that's because this work is derivative of the existing land use strategy that the region has. As we move forward, and again, as we move forward with our new regional official plan, we will be taking a nodes and corridor strategy as far as identifying those areas in the region that we can intensify with density and growth opportunities. The strategy with the TMP at this point was to bring forward the document, the master plan, that does not preempt those future opportunities. And so it's a slice in time today. As we identify and council approves those corridors and growth areas, then the transportation system adapts to it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner or Councillor Volpatti.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I guess just going on with the comments from Councillor Sendzik and Augustine, and my own thoughts about this. How do we move on from here? This is a slice in time, and I think we can appreciate that. But we also need the vision. And other than nodes and corridors, how are we going to move on from here to accomplish the planning and the vision that we need? Through you, Chair.
Commissioner?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there's considerable work yet to be done. This speaks specifically to some of the recommendations for order going forward, there needs to be a comprehensive look at the movement of goods, a goods movement study, which other jurisdictions in the GTA have done. We have to do considerable work there. With respect to public transit, there's ongoing work with the IMT that I'd suggest is not directly the jurisdiction of the region. That's a cooperative with the 3 transit providers in the region just having established a jurisdiction in at that sphere. There's a number of those initiatives that need to then go forward from this point in time, which is a critical foundation because it establishes the core. Perhaps to some degree it is addressing problems of the past, but they need to be addressed nonetheless, and it establishes that status through the DC study.
Thank you for that. And through your chair, I'm understanding this is the first step. Are we looking forward to a more visionary document that will include all the factors that the commissioner just mentioned in his answer? We'll be looking at, intermunicipal transit. We'll be looking at all these other factors that were mentioned, new technology, et cetera. Is there another document coming forward?
Through chair, at this point, I'd suggest there's going to be several. You're going to be receiving updates and considerable work we've done on the front of GO implementation and its implications to other areas. IMT, intermunicipal transit, how that evolves and the funding implications of that going forward. A goods movement study, that'll be the subject of future budget deliberations to bring forward as a specific initiative. So a single visionary consolidated document, perhaps, but at this point I see a number of very important initiatives, perhaps tracking on their own, but complementing each other.
Right. So then I think what I'd like to do is suggest that we have a visionary document that might not be quite so detailed as all of these independent studies would produce, but that we do have some kind of a document that anticipates some of this vision that might come forward. That would be my suggestion. Thank you. As a step 2. I also have a further question. I think it's slide 12, and it's addressed in bullet 5 of the report, and we might not be there yet, but this is the advocacy of a Niagara-Hamilton trade corridor. And I'm just interested in getting a fuller explanation of what this is, if it doesn't involve any highways, because I think that's what was also mentioned.
Through the chair, the Niagara-Hamilton trade corridor does involve a highway. We've called it a transportation corridor, subject to further study. It would involve environmental assessments. The Ministry of Transportation had already looked at that particular corridor over the several years and had not come to a conclusion. We feel that there is a long-term established need for redundancy to the Queen Elizabeth Way to provide commercial vehicle and tourism and other such travel.
Okay. Well, I'm shocked. I have to say that. It seemed to me when I read bullet 5 of report 3 and heard your comments on slide 22 that it did envision a highway system. And I thought that was something we put behind us some time ago. So can someone clarify that for me, please? How does it show up again here when that was not what was contemplated? Or at least I don't think it was.
Sorry, Councillor, you mean the NGTA East Corridor or a Niagara-Hamilton?
The Niagara-Hamilton Trade Corridor. Not the Queen E Corridor, but this is obviously a new corridor using Highway 20. In part.
No, through the chair. The MTO study that was completed several years ago did not reach a conclusion on the Niagara-Hamilton corridor. Since then, there's been major changes. As you know, the Niagara region is projected to grow some 36%, and also our updated travel demand forecasting and projections for traffic and the importance of Niagara's as an economic part of the Greater Golden Horseshoe has shown that the truck volumes and car volumes will cause excessive congestion on the Queen Elizabeth Way, and therefore our updated projections do indicate a need for a Niagara-Hamilton trade corridor. Also, the MTO study had a 2031 horizon year, and we've looked at a 2041 horizon year we feel that it will take a long time to plan and approve and build such a corridor. And given that there's existing congestion and problems on the QEW at this moment, we propose that we can't wait that long, that we need a short-term solution, and that upgrades and improvements to Highway 20, Regional Road 20, working with the Ministry of Transportation, can provide some short-term relief to the existing problem.
Okay, so that's exactly my point. Where does this come from? This was a subject of great contention around this council table, not only last term, but I think the initial part of this term. And all of a sudden it shows up again. Why does it show up again? Is this the only visionary part of this document? This is your vision to have a new public highway transportation corridor, east-west, and also between Niagara and Hamilton. Where does this come from?
Commissioner.
Through you, Chair, I'll speak to the two discrete areas. The east-west corridor, which was historically referred to here at the region, which is between roughly the 406 highway and the QEW, that has a status with the province, as Councillor knows, both in land use and through the
Yes.
process. This work is suggesting that it needs to be further studied, whether that, because it essentially ends at 406, whether that is supported through Highway 20 or ultimately through a net new corridor through to the Hamilton area. It's not new. It was put in abeyance in terms of as you went around through Hamilton from the province's perspective, but we still have to deal with the long-term solution of that redundant system.
Okay, I accept that. I don't know, but by the words put in abeyance, I thought it had been kiboshed. So I'd really like to have some earlier reports that discuss this made available to the committee so that we know what's gone on in the past. The history of this is really important, and the reason we decided not to proceed, because now I'm understanding the vision is to proceed. So I really need clarity on this, and I have a real issue with this whole thing. Thank you.
Councillor Redekop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just for clarification, this isn't the vision until we approve it.
Thank you for that.
So I have similar concerns with respect to a number of these issues, but if I might, and since we're on map 6, I wonder if we could go to map 5. So as I understand it, the red lines would indicate highway improvements, road improvements.
Road improvements, regional road improvements.
So if I was in Port Colborne and I had to get to the new hospital, the fastest way for me to get there would be to get up to Netherby Road and then go to Montrose. And Montrose is going to be improved south from the city down to Lions Creek Road, it looks like, but then not further south. I would have thought that that would be one of the priorities.
Through the chair, we did do a strategic analysis through our demand forecasting transportation models that look at capacity relative to demand. And based on that strategic analysis, the corridor had sufficient capacity, but there may be some operational issues that are more local in nature. I can also defer to John McGill, who's more familiar with that particular corridor.
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, we didn't specifically look at the hospital and access to and from the hospital. We did look at development and growth south of Niagara Falls and how we get there. And one of the things we're pushing for is the east-west corridor to make some connectivity, and the north-south connection of 140 to the 406 and extending that through. Those are significant improvements that we're trying to push for as part of this study. And the other road improvements to Netherby and other roads, we didn't specifically speak to Montrose, I guess, but certainly Netherby and some of the other north-south corridors we did look at. So we didn't look at specifically the hospital, but hopefully some of the improvements we're putting in place would help with some of those. some of the accesses and the new developments in the south part of Niagara Falls.
If I might, I'm going to get off of this part, but I'd like to talk about complete streets, or at least ask some questions about that. So does the complete streets philosophy apply to every regional road everywhere in the region?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is, if there's a visionary kind of perspective to this transportation master plan, it's probably that aspect of it, where we're actually saying complete streets must be a forethought as opposed to an afterthought to any design or capital project, whether it's rehab or expansion. And so, yes, it does apply to all of the regional roads, and where design guidelines and typologies that we would apply, that we've accepted, and that's in the policy that it would become applicable to every regional road.
So if I might, Mr. Chair, as an example then, when we're talking about improving Sodom Road between Lions Creek Road and Netherby Road, that would be a candidate for a complete street landscape?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the concept is we would have a sort of a workshop of some sort with the local municipalities, with the stakeholders in the area, make sure that before we get into the design criteria and some of the other elements of a project, that we ensured that we had a plan for the streetscaping. And you can imagine that some of the rural topologies are going to be much different than sort of the urban type of topologies. So what elements of those topologies we use in any particular application will be worked on as part of that workshop before we go into other aspects of the design or a capital project.
Well, I do agree that there's a distinction between the rural areas that these roads go through and the urban areas. Are there any statistics with respect to how many cyclists there are in Niagara, as an example?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't particularly have that kind of information available. I know we are working on a project in Niagara where we're looking at the complete streets concept, and we're working closely with the cycling committee that they comment on what they like, what they don't like, and what they'd like to have changed. So we are working closely with them, and they'd be one of the stakeholders that I referred to that we'd work with.
So in terms of, if I might, Mr. Chair, in terms of the complete streets, one of the projects that's identified, I think, over the next 10 years is the improvement of Stevensville Road between Eagle Street, which is north of the urban area, and Bowen Road, which is to the south. That has a very constricted road width, and you may not know the answer off the top of your head, but how would you accommodate a complete street in an area where you've got quite confined urban streetscape to begin with?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the topologies that we've put in place are meant to be flexible. They do put forward some guidelines, but they are guidelines. And where we have constrained right-of-ways, we would do our best to try and accommodate all kinds of active transportation, the cycling community. Maybe, as we talked about earlier, maybe in an instance like that, if we wanted to introduce something like a multi-use trail somewhere else that could be used as to enhance the road user's experience, we'd be looking at that. But that would be a project-specific kind of analysis.
Councillor Redicott, Commissioner Moustache would like to add to that. Commissioner?
Sure.
Thank you, Chair. And just having had, firsthand experience, as you know, Councillor Redicott, with respect to a number of streetscape projects within the region, really the key initiative here is to address two things. First of all, it's the characterization of the road. What should it be? And what does it mean to the community? Which currently the process does not address satisfactorily. So we want to make sure that there's a characterization element as part of the EA process at the outset so that we know what the best solution is for the community. So it really is community driven as far as what the streetscape should look like and function for that particular community. The other challenge that we have in particular with respect to regional roads is we're in a two-tier system. And it's actually quite difficult to coordinate the streetscape elements, particularly in an urban environment, between the local municipalities and the regional work program with respect to that road. And so the benefit of having a complete streets program, it sets out the guidelines, the characterization at the outset so that we know and are able to work more closely together, and the region takes a bit more of a leadership role in terms of the streetscape function. So that's just wanted to provide that context for members of the committee, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. That's helpful. I mean, I gather that one of the reasons for these road improvements is to alleviate congestion. And so when we're talking about congested areas, it may be that the alternative isn't to try to widen the road because it may not be an available alternative. It may be that we have to look for a different route. And I guess, and I suppose we're going to be, I can make these comments when we get to the report, but I think this plumbs the depths of the disappointment, I would say, of some of the councillors who've spoken already about where this is going, what the vision is, and how comfortable we are regarding this. It's no slight on the capabilities of the consultants. It's just a feeling that there's got to be something more, and maybe there isn't. But I think that's the problem. I'm feeling the same pain. So I have some comments that I'll make later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gale.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, the presenters, how long has this region talked about a mid-peninsula corridor? Would you know that? 20 years? 30 years?
20 years sounds appropriate.
So my point, and I'll make it quick, Chair. I don't believe in 25-year plans. The world changes too fast. I think that all our plans should be 10 years with visions to 25 or whatever, because none of us will probably be here in 25 years. I'm looking around, but Debbie's young enough, I guess. But other than that, in April. But regardless of this, I'd like to know how many 25-year plans we've had over the years that have come to fruition. I remember on the Niagara Parks Commission, and maybe Councillor Redikoff can remember, a Japanese name, a Yamaguchi plan that never even came close. And everybody said they were going to follow the plan, but it never did. My point is, through internet, through border problems, immigration, financial, the 2008 crisis that they dumped money and we had to spend it, things changed too fast. And all our plans for 25 years, even in business, they don't do it unless they're spending $1 billion on a refinery and they have to have a comeback for it. So I'm wondering why we do plans for 25 years when I know in 5 or 10 years, somebody's going to come back with another master plan here with a new crowd, and it's going to be another master plan. So I just find a lot of this a waste of time, and I'd like someone to show me a 25-year plan in any of your councils or governments that has come about, and I'll salute you in that. But, you know, I understand a 10-year plan on these things with a vision towards the future, but none of this is going to happen according to the plan because the world will change too fast.
Commissioner?
Through you, Chair, actually, the councillor referenced it right at the end of his comments. Yes, this is a 25-year vision. It's our best, with all the information that's known today, best analysis of what that vision could be, but it's revisited every 5 years. That's exactly the intent of the design of the process. We have to inform our budget decisions going further than that, but we'll be revisiting this plan every 5 years to confirm its relevancy or deal with anything changes in the landscape. That's exactly the design of the process, and the comment was made in the water wastewater study as well.
Okay, thank you for that, but through you, Chair, it says plan. Everywhere I go here is plan. I get visions. We all have visions of a lot of things happening. And the Queen Elizabeth Highway being expanded to 6 lanes was caused by a casino that nobody planned in the 1990s. Even the railway line that went through Niagara Falls that Mayor Diodati fought to get rid of the trains, that was caused by a casino, and that we didn't vision. That was no 25-year plan. But as far as this, can you tell me, Commissioner, when the last 25-year plan was that we did on things like this? Like, have we done one every 5 or 10 years, a 25-year plan? And I'm not trying to embarrass you or anything like this, but.
Commissioner.
Through Chair, harder to reference one what I would call comparable on the transportation front. I'll go back to the water wastewater. 2012, there was another 25-year plan established by this council, and now this is the work that we just saw before this. It was derivative of that, but then was a renewal of it. I mean, I get your point about the semantics. The presentation itself referred to short-term, medium-term, and long-term recommendations and the budget implications of those. As you go further out, it gets less concrete, and they get revisited. So there certainly is the expectation that it be revisited. In terms of semantics, there is a need in the lens, through the lens of the municipal Class E process, that this be a master plan, because it establishes status of certain initiatives that will go forward in the short and medium term. This is a critical part in that process to establish that status.
So the words in itself, master plan, tells me it's a plan, not a vision, and I'm not going to dwell on that, but I'd like to be able to turn to, and I'll use Mayor Redekop as an example, that this is our plan for the next 10 years, and have him challenge us on his plan, knowing what his vision is 20 years from now on his community. And I'm just using you as an example. And I don't believe in 25-year plans, and I use the Mid-Peninsula Corridor as an example. You know, where are we now in relation to that plan of 20 years ago with the Mid-Peninsula Corridor? And that I think we make a lot of consultants' money. I'm not knocking you. A lot of consultants' money over the years, and we got to stop this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Caslin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, it's obvious that what we are expecting to see in the master plan today is probably not consistent with what many were expecting to see. And I don't mean to pile on to the rhetoric, but I just want to say that, you know, the transportation master plan, in my opinion, is not a lot different than the water and wastewater master plan that we've just looked at. They both contain the same element of timing and the same element of activity. I think it's obvious from the comments that are coming back that what we're anticipating is something that was much more visionary and something that we could look forward to working on as a council in the form of transportation, not something that tells us what exists today. And in the example that I'll quote is in the on page number 15, it talks about a vision for Niagara region that in 2041, and then it goes on to talk about sustainable transportation practices and tourism. Well, you know, a lot of that we're working on today, and so if I was asked if that was a vision, I would say no, that's current day. So I think what we need, Mr. Chair, is that visionary document that talks about possibilities in Niagara. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, that you know, I envision a Niagara where there's no need to have a car. You can get to any community in Niagara without the use of a car. Now, whether that be through train, bus, or alternate transportation methods, that's a vision that I think many of us share, and that it doesn't really appear in this master plan. This is more a functional document rather than a visionary document. And I'm hoping, Mr. Chair, that we can put forward that visionary document to talk about some of the results that we'd like to see in more the near term rather than the far term.
Through Chair to Chairman Caslin, and been hearing the various comments from Council, and the feedback is very valuable, as the Commissioner said. My understanding is this is the first time the region of Niagara has embarked on an initiative such as this document of a transportation master plan. So this is the first ever that we're bringing for Council, and my understanding is that you are asking, and the theme is very common here, that you want it more visionary. I think Councillor Volpatti's asked, and we've taken note of it, of combining our master plans and preparing more of a strategic visionary that we're combining the municipal comprehensive review, the transportation master plan, the water and wastewater master plan. We're going to take that as direction and bring back to this council a more wholesome visionary document which implements all these different master plans. Thanks for the feedback.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I actually think this is different than the water and wastewater. People will always drink water. People always flush toilets. You know, there is a very, you know, understandable way to model the future use of water and wastewater services. I'm having a hard time connecting the dots of what this document is supposed to do for us. Like, I went through it and looking at it cursory, but I still having a hard time understanding. It was very clear with the water and wastewater master plan that that was part of how we were going to fit into the growth plan and actually transfer to the development charge bylaw those needs for growth and how we're going to maintain our quality of water and treatment of sewage. I'm not getting that from this plan. And I would like to find a way to be able to connect the dots. Now, is this a baseline kind of, this is where we think we should go? Because there is one table talking about future capital demands. Are the development charges for future capital requirements going to be in the asset plan? Is this a first draft? Like, I'm not sure that I understand the pathway of what this document is sending us down.
Commissioner.
Through Chair, perhaps I can provide some help specific to that question. So this document, this master plan, does exactly the same as the water wastewater. It does translate into a list of projects that are required to support us to 2041, which are largely road improvement projects as well as additional studies. In terms of the presentation, and it's a function of evolution, we've been trying to keep these concise but yet respectful and give the appropriate content for the committee. And that's why the actual master plan document hard copy was put on your desk today that has all the detail. It wasn't presented in the same format presentation with sort of a clear link to this is the work and then these are the recommended projects. It's all in there, and it is critical in order to establish that status for the DC study. So to answer the question, although the presentation kept at a very high level in terms of philosophy and key goals and vision, all the work that sequentially goes to the recommended program to facilitate growth, it's in that document as well.
Okay, yeah, Mr. Chair, if I can, I'm looking at the table, 8.1 action plan, and the check marks. The check marks kind of make me happy, but the idea of what we saw in the water and wastewater was a clear roster of projects that were going to be undertaken and would be necessary. I'm not getting any of that here, and I'm not getting the sense that this would survive any type of scrutiny from the development community, and we tried to put into the DC bylaw to make it go forward. There is nothing emphatic here that we are going to assign a percentage of development charges to transit development. Like, I think that this is the issue the committee is having. I don't want to be presumptuous and guess where people are, but there is no clear idea of where we're going with this document. You know, it looks nice, and I see the chart, the 8.1 appendice to the, or part of that chapter with the chart. That's all wonderful, but I would like to see dollars and cents assigned to that and how it is in the capital cycle that would go with that. You know, as a Welland counselor.
Councillor Grenier, just if I may, attachment B has the laundry list of projects with the capital cost estimate attached.
Thank you. I see the maps. And
so as part of TSCC.
I have the hard copy here. I'm not trying to be difficult. It's Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to.
No, it's part of TSCC 3 2017. And it's attachment B, has a laundry list of the road projects.
Okay. I tried.
If I can, Chair,
Commissioner?
for reference simplicity, they are in the report that you're referring to, and I couldn't give you the page reference
here they
right
are.
now.
Okay.
But for reference sake, we actually
I got it
attached
now.
them
it's not
independently
online.
as part of the staff report, exactly the list you're talking about, and they've been represented through the DC work in exactly the same format as the water wastewater projects.
Well, I think that, okay, sorry about that, but it's electronically. I was given a hard copy, Mr. Chairman. It's not attached. This is part of the presentation problem, and if we need to approve this at the next council cycle, we're going to have to do a little better and up the game a little bit and actually answer the questions that have been asked by committee so that we can get through this. And I think that was Mayor Senzik's question and about transit and some of the others, the purpose of the east-west connection and so on. I don't think that those are tied into clearly, and I think that a direct connection between this and the future DC bylaw has to be a little more clear. And I don't think what we went through this morning gets us there.
Councillors,
I was trying to be hot, trying to.
I appreciate where you're going, because I understand. I think what's happened is in the process, and Mr. Lambert talked about at the beginning, he set the stage by saying this is how we grow, and he talked about the municipal comprehensive review and where we're going to grow and all the areas of growth between now and 2041. The next presentation was on water and wastewater and how we are going to deal with that. How are we going to provide water and get rid of the water, and how we're going to treat the water. And it was a very laid out plan of here's a practical plan of where the infrastructure is going to be needed over the next 25 years. I think in this presentation they took a more general approach, when in actual fact there are a lot of details about roads that are being widened and rehabilitated and new roads that are being added. But because that wasn't part of the presentation, I think the practical and defined nature of it didn't really come through. In all of your questions, I find that's been the issue. So I think that it might do us all well if we come back in 3 weeks and have the presentation given again, and I've seen a lot of nodding heads, and the presentation be done again, but in a greater level of detail. Does that suit everyone's fancy? There is some time sensitivity, but I think that we can do that rather than try to walk away from where we are and come back with a plan about levitating vehicles or whatever else. I think the practical nature of what's in the document needs to be better presented. Then we can ask questions about that. We'll see how it all jives with the water and wastewater plan and the municipal comprehensive review on how we grow.
Mr. Chairman, I understand the time sensitivity because we have to approve the DC bylaw by the July council meeting. So the next council meeting, hopefully the water and wastewater master plan will be approved, and on the 29th of June, this will be done. And that still gives us enough time for staff to respond to make sure that all this is folded in properly for the DC bylaw. Are we setting ourselves up for failure, or do we have enough time to do that?
I think we have time for that. So we'll move this into a more detailed presentation at the next Public Works meeting and get it approved then, and then our timing will still work. Yeah, so can I have a formal motion? Okay, Councillor Rigby's next. Let me exhaust the question and answer, and then we'll seek that type of motion. Councillor Rigby.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And really, I just wanted to correct our CEO. There was a master plan that was completed, I think, early 2000, which was really more of a vision document, because that's when we brought forward port authorities, both train and air and water. And it was also when we visioned what we called the Mid-Peninsula Corridor at that time. And since then, a great deal of work has been going on. And we now have the East-West Corridor that's now the MTO is on board with it. The remainder, there's been a lot of work that had been going on in that issue, and in partnership with Kitchener, Waterloo, Guelph, and so on. And so those are the visions. So this is not the second one. This is the third event that we've had over almost 15 years, so every 5 years, Bob. But I wanted to comment on that because I think we forget that first master plan, it probably wasn't even the first then, has been done, and it seems that every 5 years is probably the proper numbers.
Commissioner?
Through Chair, just not to counter or be argumentative, that's the challenge we're having actually is with the semantics. There has been quite a bit of work done in terms of vision and strategy, in terms of sort of the defined master plan. This is the truly first comprehensive one. There has been quite a bit of work, but in a cohesive or sort of tactical effort that this was, this is the first time that the region has actually done it. Yes, they have done some very positive things in terms of transportation strategy and transportation vision. This is the first legitimate master plan document.
I suppose this is the first time it was called a master plan. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Redding. I look to Councillor Redicott for a refer motion for they want someone who has not spoken to it to refer it. So I'm going to ask Councillor McGregor to refer to the next meeting of Public Works. Seconder, Councillor Hodgson. All those in favor? Carry. Thank you. Okay, so PWC C29, I've got my old, which are recommendations for consideration from the Transportation Steering Committee.
Chair?
Councillor Quirk.
Can I move the report and speak to it?
You can.
I'll second it.
Okay, moved by Councillor Quirk, seconded by Councillor Valpati.
Thank you, Chair. And there was three recommendations specifically from Transportation Steering Committee that flowed through to Public Works today. Already discussed item 5.1, which was the Niagara Regional Transportation Master Plan comments, and I thank Jack for his memo that answers some of those questions. I think there's probably more information that's going to come out of a more detailed presentation next cycle, so I look forward to that. The other item, just to bring to Committee's attention, was 5.2, which was a request from Grimsby Active Transportation through the Active Transportation Steering Committee to consider naming of one of the Greenbelt trails to the Wendy Watt Trail, and I believe that will be approved if we approve this. The last item was the proposed removal of Grimsby Livingston Extension. Bruce McKenzie made a presentation last at the TSC, and he has actually provided me with the petition with over 1,100 names. And I'm wondering if I can provide that to the clerk so it can be received officially with respect to the item involved. One of the comments was made that was the Livingston extension still involved with Grimsby? Grimsby Council hasn't met before to discuss it since the TSC meeting that was just last week. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
What are we moving? To be received and that the following recommendations be approved. So all of the below would be approved by Public Works. So there may be some discussion on 1 through 5. Councillor Volpatti.
Thank you, Chair. And further to Councillor Quirk's comments, has Grimsby itself commented on the removal of the Livingston Avenue extension from the TMP?
Commissioner, do you want to speak to this?
Through you, Chair, not formally. Based on the discussion that took place at Transportation Steering Committee, there was a desire through Councillor Wilson, I believe, to bring that forward in front of Council, but I don't believe that happened just because of timing. I think perhaps Mayor Bentley will want to speak to that.
Okay.
Mayor Bentley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and no, we've not dealt with this as a municipality. We do have a resolution on record, so I think it would be appropriate if it could come to our council, at least for consideration of the recommendation, and then move forward. We do have a lot of activity in the West End, so and a lot of recent decisions being made around the Greenbelt and things, so I think it would be appropriate for us to have the opportunity to do it before it actually gets removed. I know the region has an interest in the area as well. Maybe not all the way through, but they do have an interest in the area, so we have not had a chance to deal with it yet.
Okay, and that being the case, and the rest of the recommendations are similar to do with the transportation master plan recommendations today, airports, off-road trails, and so on. I wonder if this is not better deferred also to the next term of, or the next meeting of, so it can follow on the heels of, I'm seeing nodding heads. Councillor Gale, want to refer this?
That's what I would like to do.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Rigby. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. The last item is PWC C26, acceptance of a recreational vehicle wastewater at Port Dalhousie wastewater treatment plant. Moved by Councillor Grenier, seconded by Councillor Rigby. Any discussion on this? Councillor Rigby, you want to?
Alternatives? Sorry.
Okay, so then you better not second the motion.
No, I don't. I didn't.
Okay, so I'll say the motion was moved by Gale, seconded by Quirk, and now it's on the floor, and Councillor Rigby, the first to speak to it. You'd like to refer it?
Refer it to staff for further information on alternative areas that could be used in place of this facility.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So I'll put the motion on the move to refer. All those in favor? There was a seconder, Councillor Valpatti. Yep. Opposed? Seeing none, that's referred. Carried. Okay, any other items of other business? Councillor Grenier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one quick or two quick items. Firstly, AMO consolidated and sent out a memo with respect to the landfill gas and the changes to the new regulations from Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. I just wanted to see if staff could bring some sort of update to make sure our operating landfills are in compliance, or what our intent is to move forward on that. And secondly, I was sent an article through a subscription to an environmental magazine that lauded the city of St. Catharines and the region for urban canopy mapping. Can we have an undertaking to come back to Public Works and figure out a way to extend that throughout the region, and maybe help us with our budgetary work on preserving trees at some point in the September Public Works Committee meeting? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll be real quick. I had a complaint last night that our regional transit system does not run on Sundays. It was from a resident in Chippewa that said that can't get a bus out of Chippewa to work anywhere, even on a reduced schedule. Is that true?
Is there anyone else you want?
No, not really.
All I want to know is there a reduced schedule, and if so, like, does it do the region?
I'll follow up with the answer too.
He'll follow up with that.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Grenier.
The Management and Merchants Association at the Seaway Mall in Welland has asked to bring up the issue of the departure time for the last bus leaving the mall with respect to Niagara Regional Transit. Employees cannot get to this bus because they're closing the stores and it leaves before they're ready. Can we work with the timing on that and perhaps reach out to them? And my wife makes the same complaint about teaching a night class and her students leaving before the class is done, the same issue at Niagara College. So can we review both of those issues and come back, maybe figure out a way to solve the issue with the frequent users of Niagara Regional Transit?
Okay. Seeing no further other business, there are no closed session items. The next meeting will be Tuesday, June 20th, 2017.
I'm sorry.